welcome. If you got a day or two to rest in the last month, lucky you, that's great. I hope you did. But we're off and running again. I can't believe it's the end of August, so welcome. With us today are two of our team members who'll be presenting, Adrienne Balcazar and Rachel Garcia, and I'm Bonnie McFarland, and it's my pleasure to introduce a new team member. Debbie Cano is with us and just joined us the end of June, right in the midst of our LCAP season, so we're happy to have her with us. So let's take a look at our agenda today, and it's a short one. And because we figure you have more than you can handle already. So our thought was, let's limit it to things that are coming up now and that you need to be thinking about now, focused on your federal programs. We were just kidding, this may be the only meeting you go to where we aren't going to talk about COVID or independent study, which is taking up your lives right now, I'm sure. What we are going to talk about are some funding updates, where things are on your federal funding, and just some information and things you need to be thinking about right now and aware of in terms of making sure those funds get used in a timely manner. We also know you're looking at that ESSER 3 expenditure plan, and that's the next thing coming up, so we wanted to give you a heads up on that. And then out in the future, but something that needs to be in the back of your head, is a new annual update, a mid-year annual update, and we just wanted to give you kind of an overview what you need to be collecting and be prepared for that. And then an FPM update as usual on new things that are coming in terms of compliance requirements. So that's our agenda, so hopefully we'll get through. Questions, please put them in the chat. If for those of you who are new, what we typically do is provide a follow-up Q&A after the meeting, because often your questions require us to spend more time and get an answer in writing. We want to make sure it's clear and accurate. So we follow up. All of you will, if you're registered or if you're in our list, you'll get a follow-up Q&A. Please put your questions in there. And also, if there's something we're not addressing today, please put those in there too. If it's a question we can answer right away, we'll do that. If it's something more in depth, we'll make sure to put it on our next agenda. So please put those in the chat. All right, and everything will be posted. The recording, the slides from today's meeting will be posted on our website. In fact, I believe Christine, who is on the call with us, our secretary, has already got the slides posted on that website, so you can download those. All right, let's take a look at first one, ESSA. We wanted to have some ESSA updates, primarily funding updates, and we want to look at entitlements, where we are with your federal money, some waivers, past and those past and those coming, and then also take a look at school allocations, which needs to be taking place right now. So first of all, next slide, we'll look at where we are in terms of entitlements. If you're on our email list, you should have received an email this week with your Title I entitlements. That list was it's not an official list. It's not posted yet. It is going through the process at CDE for approval, but those numbers should be pretty firm. So you should have received that. If you didn't, send us an email and we'll get it to you. Once they've gone through the approval process, those will be posted on the CDE website that's listed there. Just so you know, this list, this happened last year. When the state approves their budget, in California, the state has to approve the federal funds. And when the state approved them this year, again, as last year, they didn't approve the total amount that's available from the feds to LEAs. Last year, you might recall, if you were around, you got a late apportionment at the end of the year. So, and that was because they couldn't get that approval through to give you the additional funds. Don't ask me the ins and outs of why that happens, but it happened again this year, but to a lesser degree. So it appears that what you're receiving is probably statewide, it's about 1% low. So you might, and they hope this will be corrected earlier in the year than last year. So your current, what's posted, your current allocation may go up just slightly from what's there. So that will be posted. As for the other titles, Title II is already posted, so you can find your Title II, and these are 21-22, so current year entitlements. Title II is currently posted. Title III, your EL and immigrant, those are not posted yet. You'll go to the link and you'll see a link there, but when you go it says coming soon, so you'll need to just keep checking that link for your Title III. I know for Title III, when you did your consolidated application, you got a rough, they gave you an estimate. So Title III, at least you have an estimate to go on, but the actual amount will be posted. Title IV, again, it's not posted yet either, but will be posted at this site as soon as available. So that's where we are on, we should be having current year funding posted very soon. All right. So let's take a look at some other fiscal issues. We have a couple waivers that are pending, and they're for 2 different years because they deal with 2 different issues, but they both impact funds that would be coming to an end this September 30th. So these are both waivers that are applicable to funds that would expire September 30th of this year. And unfortunately, I'll say fortunately, there is a waiver pending. Unfortunately, it came very late. We heard from some of you last spring with concerns about excess because of all the influx of federal money. Your ESSA funds were not getting spent as you would hope they would. So you were concerned about carryover and also about the funding ending timelines. So the good news is the U.S. Department came out with a waiver option. The bad news is they didn't do it until July. So it is in process. CDE is moving forward with these 2 waivers, and it will require state board approval in September, but they are moving forward with the procedures at this time. The waiver is sitting on the desk at the U.S. Department waiting for approval. We anticipate that these will be approved. Every indication is there will be approved, and the state board meeting in September will be kind of a formality about getting that through. So the first waiver is for 1920 funds. So this would extend the period of availability for the funds you received in 1920, okay, for an additional year. That's the waiver is pending. It would extend those funds. They were due to expire this September, so you would have lost those funds if they weren't spent by September. This waiver would allow you to continue those 1920 funds through September 30th of 22, so you'd have an additional year for any of the funds. This waiver applies to almost all your ESSA funds, so all your Title II. It doesn't apply to migrant funds, but otherwise it applies to all the Title I funds. It applies to Title II, III, and IV, including the Part B, which is the 21st century. REAP, most of you don't get that. That's for rural districts. McKinney-Vento is also included there, and CSI. So if you have CSI funds that were about to expire for your CSI schools, this would apply to them. We often get the question, so what do you have to do to take advantage of the waiver? For this waiver, you don't have to do anything. CDE applies for the waiver on behalf of all districts in the state. So if the waiver's approved, it's a done deal. You're approved to carry over those funds. So again, unfortunate that they keep you on the edge of your seat until the last minute, but we do anticipate those will be approved. The other waiver is for 2021 funds, this year that just ended. For those funds, as you know, there's a carryover limit for Title I, and Title I allows you to have a waiver of that carryover limit, but only CDE can only approve it once every 3 years. So for many of you, you got into a bind in the last couple of years. You've already had waivers for your Title I carryover. You can only carry over 15%, so you have to spend 85% of the funds in the first year. This waiver would allow CDE to approve your waiver of excess carryover even if you had one in the prior 2 years. So this, for those of you, I think some of you were concerned, your Title I carryover was an issue. This would allow CDE to approve
His last one. He did great.
Oops. Somebody's not muted. um, so, so somebody, so the, you would have, again, this would allow you, if the other waiver, the 1920 fund waiver is approved, this would allow you to again carry those funds over. So where are we here? Okay, got distracted. All right, this only applies to Title I Part A, so it's only your Title I funds. It's pending. Now, what do you have to do to get this waiver? And nothing at this time, but there is action you will need to take if you want the waiver. This would be in the February of 2022 consolidated application. That's where you apply for the waiver. So really, we always say it's asking for forgiveness after the fact. It's not because you've already passed the time period. But CDE would, and usually they approve those waivers. What you have to do in the CONAP is describe how you're going to use the funds and check off the box requesting a waiver, and that's the process. Okay, so those are all pending. Stay tuned, but we feel very confident that those are going to go forward. 1920 for all your funds, 2021 for your Title I funds only. So we wanted to look on the next slide at some of the other previous waivers that are things that should be in the back of your mind or the front of your mind right now anyway. And this is going back to 2018-19 funds. And in 2018-19, we got a waiver to extend the period of availability for those funds. They were due to expire last year. Okay, most of you, I looked at most of our districts are in pretty good shape on that, but you might want to double check and make sure that all your 18-19 funds are expired by September 30th of this year. So those funds, all Title I, II, III, and IV, all of them are closing out. You need to spend those if you have anything left. And this is why, if you have new fiscal people, they need to know they need to track those funds by year. We have some fiscal people think you can just lump it all together, and those funds have to be tracked by year. So they need to check your 18-19. In this case, if you do not spend those funds by September 30th, you will be invoiced by CDE for any funds not obligated by September 30th. Okay. You do have a 90-day liquidation period, so if you can get those obligated through contract or something, if you have any funds that you're concerned about, but that's worth checking into to make sure you don't lose any. The other is your 1920. Last year, we had, again, a Title I carryover waiver, and those funds, typically, you have, when you got the waiver, you applied for the waiver, and you would have until this September to spend them. If the other waiver that's pending passes, then you would have, again, through September 30th, 2022, to spend all of your Title I funds. So again, it's pending that waiver. And you previously applied for this, nothing that you need to do here. If you need a waiver, you already applied for that in the CONAP. Right? So that's just all the waiver background, where we are, and with your federal funding. So in the next slide, we'll take a look at what you need to do if you want to check on these. And we use this slide all the time, and this is a good website to know about. If you're not sure where your funds are in terms of how much you've spent, you can go to the CDE website. You go to Finance and Grants. Underneath that, Allocations and Apportionments, and you're going to look at Categorical Programs. When you go there, you'll see all the federal programs and other programs listed. This one happens to be Title I, so you click on what it is. And when you go to that site, you will find funding results for multiple years. It goes back a number of years. So you could check, if you had 18-19, you could go down all the way down to 18-19, and what you're looking for is there any money left there. So your 19-20, you're going to see for each program, where are you? So what you'll look at when you go, you'll get a spreadsheet that looks like this. The spreadsheet will show that you have your CONAP is approved, your federal addendum's approved. That's the first two columns. The next column will show your total allocation amount. Okay, for the new money, that's all you'll have for 21-22. For your old money, previous years, you'll have on the last column here, you'll have a remaining balance. and that's what you want to look at and see what your balance is. If you're new to the district, an interesting thing to look at is to go back and look at these apportionments for prior years and see, are they coming on a regular basis? If you're not getting apportionments, it means probably the district hasn't been spending their money in a timely manner, because you only get 25% of your money unless you spend 25% down each quarter. So this is how, here's an example of what a district's getting each quarter in their apportionments. But a good place to look, just to make sure you don't have any money hanging out there that's going to get swept. All right. So now that you know for Title I what your money is, you can start allocating those monies out to schools. Actually, we encourage districts to start that earlier so schools can plan based on estimates, but now you have some final numbers that you can use. So Title I is a school level program. It's the only one of the 4 programs that requires school level allocations. The others are district programs. And this needs to happen at the beginning of the year. So let's take a look at what that means. All right, so any LEA with 1,000 students or more has to annually rank its schools and allocate Title I funds to the school attendance areas in rank order based on low-income numbers. All right, school attendance area is a term they use frequently instead of just school, because it has implications for private schools, that it's the attendance area of the school is what's used for determining low income. So that just means school, okay? An eligible school attendance area means a school with an that has the percentage of low-income students in that school is at least as high as the district average, okay? So to be eligible for Title I funding, the school has to have a low-income number at least as high as the district average, okay? Generally, charter schools aren't required to rank because there's only one school, so there's nothing to rank. So, and school allocations are reported in the winter consolidated application, so they're not reported until February. And the problem we find is that sometimes people wait until February to allocate funds, which is just not appropriate at all. You don't wait till the middle of the year to get money out to schools. So that ranking needs to take place now, and you have, there's a requirement that you notify schools of their eligibility and their final funding amounts. Just to comment on eligibility, an eligible school attendance area does not mean you have to serve that school. It means it's eligible. That's why you rank them. And you need to look at how much money you have and how much money does it take to implement a reasonable program. And that's kind of your call at the district. And there's a point where you want to cut it off. Sometimes people try and sprinkle Title I money around so everybody gets a few dollars, and that's not an effective use of the funds. You're supposed to have enough to provide a viable program that is going to have an impact on student achievement and closing achievement gaps. So think about that. And so people say eligible, oh, I've got to fund them. Not necessarily. It's your call where you make that cut. Okay. All right, next we'll look at how do you do this. So what you're going to look at is your data you're going to use is your fall 2020 certified CalPADS data for free and reduced meal students age 5 through 17. So that's the data you're going to use to rank. When the consolidated application comes out in February, that's the data that's going to be in the Con App and that to rank your schools. So that's what you use. That's the certified data. If you have something wild, crazy going on in your district that totally changes your poverty counts and your demographics within the district, you can update that if you have some verifiable data, but you need to document what that is. Okay? Then you have to look at all your schools, and any school with over 75% poverty has to be served. Okay? So if you have any 75%, that's off the top, you serve them. You do have an option to serve any high school with 50% poverty before you serve other schools, so you can push up a high school. This came from ESSA, and they're concerned that high schools were not being served. So that's an option, though. You don't have to. You do have to serve 75%, but you may serve 50% high schools before you serve other schools. After you've served those schools, you next have a choice to make. You need to rank your schools, and you can do it one of two ways. You can do it district-wide, which means you put them all in a row, and high to low in terms of poverty, or you can do it by grade span. So you can to your elementary, your middle, your high schools, either way. And oftentimes you want to take a look at both ways if you're a unified district and see which one seems to fit your neediest schools. So that's an option for the district. Another option is you can vary the per pupil amount. You might, if you want to push more money into a particular school, you can do that by varying the per pupil amount. It doesn't have to be the same. However, there's a caveat. If you vary the per pupil amount, you have to have a higher per pupil amount to going to schools with higher concentrations of poverty. So just keep in mind the easy way to remember Title I is about getting funds to your highest poverty schools and serving your neediest students, okay, who are most at risk academically. All right, next we'll take a look at some other considerations. All right, first is carryover. If you have carryover funds, you have some options. Some districts just allow schools to maintain their carryover. Okay. Others pull it back and reallocate it with all of the other funds. In other cases, you might pull it in and use it for a district reservation. Those are all your calls. Sometimes when people pull it all back because they find that schools don't spend their funds in a timely manner, so they pull it back out and then reallocate it. But you have choices about carryover. It goes back to the school, or you can use it for district reservations. Okay. We have a 35% rule. Those of you who have more affluent districts, this would apply to. If you have eligible schools, that means they're above the district poverty rate, but they're below 35%. They're not eligible to be served unless the district poverty rate is below 35%. But if you fund a school that's below 35% poverty, but at the district average, all your schools have to be funded at 125%, which always sounds like magic making to me. What it means is you have very little funds available for district level administrative costs, because you have to take that off the top first. Okay? Exceptions to ranking, okay, is one's a grandfather clause. If you have a school that drops out of eligibility, you may fund them for one additional year only. And the other is a feeder pattern. If you have middle and high schools and you don't feel that their free and reduced lunch counts accurately reflect their poverty level, you can use a feeder pattern. And that means you're using a feeder pattern from your elementary schools to your middle to your high, if it more accurately reflects the poverty level at those high schools. Keep in mind, any funds you're going to transfer from Title II or IV have to be included in your funding when you rank your schools. And any funds reserved for district level allocations, okay, if we have district, you can take funds off the top for district services, but those services can only be for Title I schools. Often people refer those as district-wide services. They are not district-wide unless you're all Title I. They can only be for Title I schools. And the FPM Fiscal Office has said they would be looking for those to be reflected in school plans. So if you go to this link, you'll find at CD website, they've done a great job describing, putting in detail all the requirements for ranking and serving. All right, and related to that, of course, are school plans. If schools have approved school plans already, they already got their plans together, then they would need to update them based on the current funding. So your school site council would need to be informed of the funding available, and if that is significantly different than what was estimated, then they need to make some changes to reflect that in their plan. If they don't have an approved plan in place, they need to develop a school plan and have it board approved prior to spending current year funds, because particularly for school-wide programs, the only way to know if a cost is allowable is based on the school plan. So you can't spend funds without an approved plan. So that's the next task that needs to take place. All right, and one more thing to remember while you're allocating funds, you need to keep in mind our private schools. Districts have to determine what funding is available for your private schools that you put on the Con App in June that we're participating, and that's going to be based on the number of low-income students who reside in Title I school attendance areas. So now you've ranked your schools, you know which are your Title I schools. if a private school student attends that school and they're participating, and they're low income, they would generate funds. Then to serve the students, it's only going to be academically at-risk students based on criteria that you've established with the private school, and that is students who reside in a Title I school attendance area and meet one of the multiple objective academic criteria you've agreed upon. So poverty is not a criteria for service for private school students or for any students. For Title II and IV, funding for private school services is based on the total school enrollment, and for Title III, it's going to be based on your number of eligible students. All right. Okay, so I am going to move it over to Rachel, who's going to talk with you about the ESSER expenditure plan, which is the next thing coming up in your life. Rachel?
Thank you, Bonnie. Good morning, everyone. So as Bonnie mentioned, we're going to go over information related to the ESSER 3 expenditure plan. Next slide, please. So ESSER 3 funding was part of the most recent federal relief package signed into law as the American Rescue Plan Act on March 11th, 2021. And this was the third such act, with the first two being the CARES Act and the CRSA, or otherwise known as the Carissa Act. And so the ARP Act requires LEAs to complete two plans. The first plan was the Safe Return to In-Person Instruction and Continuity of Services plan. And this plan focuses on the safe operation of schools and was required to be submitted within 30 days of submission of the assurances. The second required plan, which we will be focusing on in this section, is the ESSER 3 expenditure plan. And that must describe how the LEA plans to use ESSER 3 funds to address students' academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs, as well as the opportunity gaps that existed before and were worsened by the pandemic. Next slide, please. So here we see an overview of the timeline for the ESSER 3 expenditure plan. So the plan must be adopted by the local governing board or body of the LEA at a public meeting on or before October 29th, 2021. Then the plan must be submitted to the LEA's reviewing authority for review and approval within 5 days of adoption. The reviewing authority will then review and approve the ESSER 3 plan by December 17th. And additionally, county offices must submit a list of LEAs with approved plans to the CDE by January 21st, 2022. And it's also important to note that LEAs must post the ESSER 3 expenditure plan on its website. Next slide, please. So when submitting the ESSER 3 plan for review and approval, school districts must submit its plan to its county office of education. County offices must submit its plan to the CDE, and charter schools must submit its plan to its chartering authority for review, and also must submit its plan to the county office of education of the county in which the charter school operates for review and approval. For school districts and charter schools located within LA County, ESSER 3 plans will need to be submitted through our LCAP system. We will be adding a tab in the LCAP system for districts and charters to upload the plan, similar to other previous plan uploads. And so once that tab is added to our system, we'll be sending out additional information on that process. Next slide, please. So the ARP Act requires LEAs to use at least 20% of its ESSER 3 allocation to address the academic impact of lost instructional time through the implementation of evidence-based interventions. And so, for example, this may include summer learning or enrichment, extended day, comprehensive after-school programs, extended school year programs, evidence-based tutoring, mental health services and supports, or adoption or integration of social emotional learning into the core curriculum or the school day. The other 80% of ESSER 3 funds may be used consistent with the allowable uses of the ESSER 3 funds. And the allowable uses of ESSER 3 funds can be found on the CDE ARP webpage, which we've also included a link to at the end of this section. And it can also be found on pages 2 and 3 of the expenditure plan instructions. Next slide, please. So with regards to engagement requirements for the development of the ESSER 3 plan, LEAs must provide the opportunity for public input and take such input into account. In acknowledgement of the substantial amount of planning that LEAs have already completed related to the prevention and mitigation strategies and addressing the academic impact of lost instructional time, the template and instructions seek to provide LEAs with the flexibility to reference actions and/or community input described in existing plans, such as the LCAP or the ELO grant plan, to the extent that that input is applicable to the ESSER 3 expenditure plan requirements. The required groups that LEAs must engage in consultation with are similar to the groups involved in the LCAP process. And this includes students, families, including those that speak languages other than English, school and district administrators, including special education administrators, teachers, principals, school leaders, other educators, school staff, and local bargaining units. Additionally, there's a requirement to engage other groups if they are present or served by the LEA. And this includes tribes, civil rights organizations, and other individuals or advocates representing the interest of children with disabilities, English learners, homeless students, foster youth, migratory students, children who are incarcerated, and other underserved students. And CDE has also indicated that they have reached out to the US Department of Education for further clarification on what it means by to the extent they are present or served in the LEA. Next slide, please. So here we see some screenshots of the ESSER 3 expenditure plan template and instructions. And we've also included the link to the CDE webpage where you can access the template and instructions. Next slide, please. So this slide just provides an overview of the sections of the expenditure plan, which we'll be taking a closer look at in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. So on the first page of the template, the LEA must provide the following information: the name of the LEA, the name and title of the LEA contact, and the email address and phone number of the LEA contact. And as previously mentioned, LEAs have the flexibility to include community input and/or actions included in other plans, such as the LCAP or the ELO grant plan, provided that that input or those actions address the requirements of the ESSER 3 expenditure plan. And so an LEA that chooses to utilize community input and/or actions from other plans must provide the name of the plans referenced, as well as a description of where the plan or plans may be accessed by the public. So this might include a link to a web page or the physical location, such as the street address of where the plan or plans are available. And an LEA that chooses not to utilize community input or actions from other planning documents may indicate not applicable in the table. Next slide, please. So the first section of the plan is the summary of planned ESSER 3 expenditures. And so the summary of expenditures table provides an overview of the ESSER 3 funding received by the LEA and how the LEA plans to use its ESSER 3 funds to support the strategies and interventions being implemented by the LEA. So in the first section, LEAs must indicate the total amount of ESSER 3 funds received. In the total planned ESSER 3 expenditures column, LEAs must then indicate the amount of ESSER 3 funds being used to implement actions in the 3 applicable sections. And finally, in the last section on the screen, LEAs must provide the total amount of ESSER 3 funds being used to implement actions in the plan. And during the CDE's Tuesday at 2 webinar on the ESSER 3 expenditure plan back in July, it was stated that all ESSER 3 funds needed to be included in the plan. So essentially, the total funds received must match the total funds included in the plan. Next slide, please. So the next section of the plan is community engagement, and there are 2 prompts within this section. The instructions also provide additional details as to what a sufficient response will include for both of these prompts. Prompt 1 asks for a description of the efforts made by the LEA to meaningfully consult with its required community members and the opportunities provided by the LEA for public input in the development of the plan. So for this prompt, LEAs will need to describe how they sought to meaningfully consult with each of the required groups, how the LEA promoted opportunities for community engagement, and also how the LEA provided opportunities for public input in the development of the plan. Prompt 2 asks for a description of how the development of the plan was influenced by community input. So for this prompt, LEAs will need to describe how input from community members and the public at large was considered in the development of the ESSER 3 plan, as well as what aspects of the plan were influenced by that input from community members. Next slide, please. The next section of the ESSER 3 expenditure plan is the actions and expenditures section. And there are 3 categories within this section: the strategies for continuous and safe in-person learning, addressing the impact of lost instructional time, and then the third category, which is the use of any remaining funds. And so again, as previously mentioned, LEAs have the option to include actions described in existing plans, such as the LCAP or the ELO grant plan, to the extent that those actions address the requirements of the ESSER 3 expenditure plan. So when including actions from other plans, the LEA must describe how the actions included in the ESSER 3 expenditure plan supplement the work described in the plan being referenced. And the LEA must specify the amount of ESSER 3 funds that it intends to use to implement the actions. And it's important to note that these ESSER 3 funds must be in addition to any funding for those actions that are already included in the plans being referenced. Next slide, please. So here is a screenshot of that first section within the actions and expenditures section. And so this is the strategies for continuous and safe in-person learning. So first, the LEAs must provide the total amount of ESSER 3 funds being used to implement actions related to continuous and safe in-person learning. And it's important to note that this amount should align with the amount that was indicated in the summary of planned ESSER 3 expenditures mentioned on one of the previous slides. And so in the first column, if the action is included in another plan, then you would identify the plan and provide the applicable goal and/or action number from the plan. And if the action is not included in another plan, you would write NA or not applicable. The second column asks for a short title for the action. And then the third column, LEAs would provide a description of the action the LEA will implement using ESSER 3 funds for prevention and mitigation strategies that are to the greatest extent practicable in line with the most recent CDC guidance in order to continuously and safely operate schools for in-person learning. And finally, in the last column, you would specify the amount of ESSER 3 funds that the LEA plans to expend to implement the actions. And then again, if these ESSER 3 funds if this is an action being referenced in another plan, these ESSER 3 funds must be in addition to any funding for those actions already included in the plans being referenced. Next section, or next slide, please. So the next category in the actions and expenditures section is addressing the impact of lost instructional time. And so here you can see that it follows the same format as the previous table. So in this section, LEAs must describe the actions that will be implemented with ESSER 3 funds to address the academic impact of lost instructional time through the implementation of evidence-based interventions. And so a few examples that were previously provided were summer learning or summer enrichment, extended day, comprehensive after-school programs, or extended school year programs. And then again, as a reminder, LEAs must use at least 20% of its ESSER 3 funds in this category. Next slide, please. The last table in the actions and expenditures sections is for the use of any remaining funds. And so LEAs may use any remaining ESSER 3 funds to implement additional actions to address the academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs of students, as well as address opportunity gaps consistent with the allowable uses of ESSER 3 funds. LEAs choosing to use ESSER 3 funds in this manner must provide the total amount of funds being used to implement actions with any remaining ESSER 3 funds, and then complete the table in the same manner as described in the previous sections. If an LEA has allocated its entire apportionment of ESSER 3 funds to the previous two sections, so strategies for continuous and safe in-person learning, and addressing the impact of lost instructional time, then the LEA may indicate that it is not implementing additional actions. And also, if the LEA is not implementing additional actions, the LEA must indicate $0 in the table. Next slide, please. So here we see a screenshot of the last section of the ESSER 3 plan. The LEA is required to ensure that its interventions will respond to the academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs of all students, and particularly those students most impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And that includes students from low-income families, students of color, English learners, children with disabilities, students experiencing homelessness, children in foster care, and migratory students. So in the table, the LEA must provide the action title of the actions being measured, a description of how the LEA will monitor progress of the actions to ensure that they are addressing the needs of students. And then in the last column, the LEA must specify how frequently progress will be monitored. So for example, it could be daily, weekly, monthly, every 6 weeks, and so on. And also the instructions indicate that actions may be grouped together in the same row if the LEA plans to monitor the progress of the actions in the same way, as well as with the same frequency. So each action included in the ESSER 3 expenditure plan must be included within this table, either individually or as part of a group. Next slide, please. And so here on this slide, we've included a few links to CDE resources related to the ESSER 3 expenditure plan. So the first link is to the ESSER 3 allowable uses. And then we've also included the link to the template and instructions, as well as a link to some CDE frequently asked questions related to the ESSER 3 expenditure plan. And so that concludes my section. So now I will turn it back over to Bonnie for the supplemental annual update.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, so this is an out in the future task, but so we want you to we kind of wondered, should we even mention anything? You've got enough on your plate, but there are some things that you'll need to know about this supplemental annual update so you're prepared for it. So let's take a look at what this is about. So what's the reason? Why are we doing it? Well, it went, as you recall, in the Budget Act, there was a significant increase in LCFF funds. So what you planned for in your LCAP isn't going to match the funding that's in there, and that was it. There was, first of all, there was additional concentration grant add-on funding, and then we have our one-time state and federal funding that had to do with COVID. So there's some funding that didn't get captured, and earlier this late in the spring or in the summer, we were wondering if there was going to be a requirement to revise LCAPs, and people were concerned about that, and instead they're looking at this supplemental update as taking care of some of those things. So the update's intended to provide boards and stakeholders an update on how you're using the funds received under the Budget Act and your additional ESSER funds, and how community members were engaged in the use of those funds. So let's take a look a little bit more in depth. So this came about as Senate Bill, Assembly Bill 130 required the State Board of Education to adopt a template for this. The template is not yet complete, but we have some samples, some drafts out we'll take a look at. But it'll be November 30th, so it'll be at the November board meeting that the State Board will adopt the template. And the template, it's called a supplemental annual update template, and it needs to include the following. It's going to require a description of how and when your community members were engaged on the use of the additional funds provided in the Budget Act that weren't included in your LCAP. So the additional funding you received, you got later, how is that being used? Next, the other, on the next slide, is the second requirement. The template will require a description of how your additional concentration grant add-on was used. And how is it used? It has to be used for staffing in particular campuses, and we'll take a look at that. So how was it used to meet the requirements of that additional concentration grant add-on? And how and when were community members engaged in the use of your one-time federal funds? All right. So a lot on stakeholder engagement, you'll notice. All right, next slide is, all right. Next, it needs to provide an update on your implementation of your American Rescue Plan, which is your ESSER 3, which is what Rachel just talked about. So now you've developed an expenditure plan. This is going to be an update on how you're implementing those actions that you just described in that ESSER plan. And then a description of how your fiscal resources for this year are being used consistently with all your applicable plans. All right, and these are from CDE presented, these are from slides that CDE presented recently at the Committee of Practitioners meeting at CDE, raised a lot of questions, so we anticipate this is going to morph along the way. All right, next slide is, again, the template. CDE is in the process of developing templates, so you will probably see, I anticipate there will be some webinars coming up where when they get close, they'll be sharing drafts of the template, but again, it won't be improved until November. And how does this hit you? It will be in February, by February 28th. LEAs need to present this information in the template at a regularly scheduled meeting of the governing board. So February is your deadline for presenting this information to your board. Take a look at what we've seen so far. This is a look at what the draft on the template, and you can see it looks a lot like some of the others, but the first one is just a description of your consultation for the additional LCFF funds. So how did you consult on the use of those additional funds that were not in your original LCAP? How are you using the concentration add-on if that applies to you? And again, this only applies to districts who receive the concentration grant under LCFF. So that's districts with over 55% unduplicated pupils. And then the third one has to do with your consultation on your ESSER 3 plan, which sounds a lot like what Rachel just described. And then an update on your ESSER 3 implementation. So what you described in the ESSER 3 plan that you're doing in the next month, how's it going and how's implementation look? And then the last one is a description of how your safe return and continuity of services that you described this summer, how is that, how's that being implemented, and how's it aligning with your LCAP? So how do all these pieces kind of fit together is the last one. All right. All right, so let's take a look at the concentration grant add-on, because that's, I think, maybe gone under the radar a little bit. Districts with over 55% of unduplicated pupils receive not only a supplemental grant, but also receive a concentration grant. The recent legislation added additional funding for those districts. And so if a district receives a concentration grant, they will receive an increase this year, and it's called an add-on. And the requirement for that fund is that the funds are used to increase the number of credentialed or classified staff who provide direct services to students on school campuses that have over 55% unduplicated pupils. So these are funds, they go to concentration grant districts. You get an additional 15%. Usually you got 50% of your grant. Now you're getting 65%. So that additional 15% is what the additional concentration grant add-on is. It needs to be used for staff, and it needs to be used at campuses that have over 55% unduplicated pupils. So it's going to be your high poverty, high EL schools. All right. So what do you need to do now? Next step, because you'll be reporting on this in February, so we don't want you to get caught short. So first of all, you need to find out, do I receive a concentration grant? Well, if your LEA has an unduplicated pupil count of over 55%, you should be receiving concentration grant funding, and that means you have received the add-on. Those funds have already been allocated as part of your LCFF allocation. So you need to work with your business office on that. And that's the next step. Go talk with your business office and find out how much is that. The Budget Act included 65%. So that's a 15% increase. So you need to come up with how much is that 15%. And then you need to identify which schools would be receiving the additional staff. And so next step, identifying those schools. Then comes the hard part, and I know that's the hard part for you, because finding staff is the hardest thing I think people are facing right now, people to do the work. But this is about staff. There's a lot of flexibility there, but staff who provide direct support to students. So you'll need to show in February how you use that 15% additional to provide staff to those schools. All right. And I think that is, and we will continue to keep you updated on that, because I think things are going to change as we get closer to having a template. And there are some of the questions on there that are, that I certainly have questions about. So I think we'll be hearing more on this, and we'll keep you posted. But now we're going to turn back to something near and dear to your heart, FPM. Adrian's going to give us an update on some things that might be helpful in terms of maintaining compliance. Adrian?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Today we will end our meeting with the federal program monitoring update. If you are new to the federal programs world, the purpose of federal program monitoring is to verify that your programs that are funded by federal sources meet the specific legal requirements, and that the compliance within your federal programs is determined by the review of evidence that's requested from program instruments. Remember, FPM addresses not only the compliance, but also the effectiveness of your programs. Here is a list of districts and charters that have been selected for this year's CDE FPM reviews. You can see that the Cycle B selected LEAs are online reviews, and that Cycle D LEAs are having on-site reviews. CDE has an update for current FPM reviews. So Cycle B, the online reviews, will remain online for the 21-22 school year. However, the on-site reviews, if necessary, may need to switch from an on-site review to a telemonitoring review based on any particular circumstances. So CDE said for Cycle D on-site reviews for the month of September, these will be switched to telemonitoring reviews, so that, and the CDE has notified these districts and charters that are having their review from on-site switch to telemonitoring. I get too many of those calls. If you look here at the green table on this slide, you will see the different formats and the specific activities that are involved during a FPM review. So if it's on site, if it's online, and what that means if you are switched to a telemonitoring review. So you can see entrance meetings, employee interviews, the ELAC, DLAC advisory committee interviews, the school site council interview, and the exit meeting that takes place if you are having an on-site review. So if you're new, this kind of gives you a general overview of what your FPM review would look like. So what if your district or charter wasn't selected for an FPM review by CDE? Well, you're not off the hook. Everyone should be looking at the 21-22 FPM instruments. You need to determine first, what programs are you participating in and what changes were made to these instruments once you obtain them. And then how do these changes affect what's happening at your district currently with your policies and with your procedures that you have in place? And then do you need to create policies? Do you need to modify them based on any new updates to the instruments? So again, these are some things that should be started now if they haven't already started during the summertime. Each year, CDE posts the annual updated program instruments on their website. The most recently updated instruments have been uploaded, and they are the Title IV Part A instrument. And as you can see, the arrows pointing to August 9th, there is an updated instrument that was previously called CARES, is now been renamed as Federal Stimulus Programs Instrument, so that it includes all of the CARES and all of the federal relief funds that have been distributed, so that those are all included within this particular monitoring instrument. So again, making sure that you have now will download this newest one if you didn't know that. And so we provided the link on the slide so that you are able to go straight to this page on CDE's website. CDE held their annual 21-22 FPM training earlier this month on August 3rd through the 6th. And they held it via Zoom, so it wasn't in person. Typically, LACO hosts it here for the South End, but it was conducted through the Zoom. And if you attended the training, you're already familiar with how to access the training materials and resources. But today I wanted to show the rest of you that weren't that didn't attend this, and the information here is so vital, especially if you're new, but actually if you're not, because you're going to see the most updated materials that were shared at this training. So CDE uses the application called the box. And so you will find in the box all the training materials and resources that are uploaded and accessible for download for you. The link at the slide, on the slide at the bottom, will take you right to the folder. And so as you see here, the folder that's included for this particular August training are these folders here. If you see a folder missing, that's because the training was not presented during this time. But again, sometimes they have other trainings. If you go to the website, you can find other resources. So inside a specific folder, you will find the instrument, you will find PowerPoint presentations and additional materials and resources that were shared. So to navigate within this the system, I'm going to show you through an example. So if you wanted to know about the FPM general resources, you're going to see it organized by the title of the folder. You're going to see and it's organized in terms of the most recent updated changes in those folders. So it will move, the folder all the way to the top. So it will say, as you see here, it was updated today. And then the size will tell you how many documents are included within that folder. So it kind of gives you an overview of what's there. Then when you click on that folder, you will see a whole list of different items. Some folders have 2 items, 4 items. Some folders have 12. And so then when you take a look, you can see specifically the documents that are within it. And so you have here, if you wanted to see in this FPM General Resources folder, if you wanted to see for last year's 2021 FPMs that were conducted, if you wanted to look at the findings of the non-compliance items, you would click on this Excel spreadsheet. From there, the spreadsheet would open up and you would see the Excel spreadsheet with the frequent findings. And so as you can see, this Excel sheet has many sheets to it, many pages. So I clicked on to CE instrument and I see these are the top. And they're ranked so that you can see what item in the instrument has the most findings. So we see here that school site composition is the number 1 with 26 findings out of 135 reviews. So again, all of this additional resource is really helpful for you in one, if you're new and you want to learn about all the aspects of FPM, but also you want to make sure that you're up to date and you are moving forward with the right focus and making sure you've included all of those changes that are updated in the instrument itself. So when you see this, you're going to see in this instrument, or in this app, you're going to see the word download as the arrow is pointing to. So all you have to do is click on the download, and it does take a few minutes or seconds, but you will see a pop-up that says your download is in progress. But remember, you do not need to log in. You do not need to create an account. You simply just need to be patient, and you can click the X and you can get out. And eventually, once it's downloaded, it will ask you where do you want it downloaded to, what file, or on your desktop. So again, it's just a matter of being patient and then knowing that it's the pathway that you're going to download it to. So that is, as you can see, that is a great resource that we want to encourage you to utilize. Thank you, Rachel, for putting that in the chat box, because again, you can spend a lot of time, but you can also provide it for the different departments that are monitoring and implementing the other various programs that you see there. So you want to make sure that this is part of your training, part of disseminating the information, because FPM should not be a mystery. It should simply be implementing the program with the required assurances and requirements. And if you are selected for FPM, it's a matter of just collecting the evidence that already exists. So moving forward and preparing for the 21-22 school year, one thing is certain, whether you're being FPM reviewed or not, both program staff and fiscal staff need to work together because, again, program compliance and fiscal compliance are to work together to implement your federal programs. So some questions to ask yourself is, what currently are your internal controls? What does that look like? Does everyone know what they are and how they are being followed? Secondly, are you following them? Is the district following what they've set out to put in place? Policies and procedures, not only just making sure that you've updated all of your policies and procedures, but are they being followed? Because again, that's what the FPM review is doing. They're looking to see that not only do you have them in place, but is everybody following them? Another big, item about the FPM is timekeeping and the requirements that are associated with that. Does everyone understand why? And are you providing the support and the training for the people that are having to keep time and turn in those reports to you? So again, what does your structure look like? What does the support at your district look like and at charters? And then also allowable costs. Are the expenditures and the services that are wanting to be implemented, are they allowable? So people need to know what is allowable and is it allowable and can it be allowable? So again, does everybody know that? Is there a process in place to see that that is monitored? And lastly, supplement, not supplant. That is a cornerstone to federal programs. Title I is applied slightly different, although there is a supplement, not supplant requirement. And the other programs as well in Title II, III, IV, they all have the traditional supplement, not supplant. It must augment what your base program and what you're doing for students, for all students. So these have intended purposes that supplement your program that exists. So lastly, I just want to remind everyone that whether you have been selected for a federal program review or not, accountability does not go away. So we just wanted to remind you of that. So it will continue. So at that,
Adrian,
yes,
before you go, there's I think an easy question, a yes/no question that came up. The CDE training.
yes,
Did they post the recordings of those? I didn't see those, but
they did not record them.
Okay.
They are not recorded. They are just providing the actual PowerPoints and training materials. That's it.
Thank you.
No, there were actually some sessions that were recorded.
Great.
So you can follow up on that. All of the sessions weren't, you're right. The fiscal one was not recorded and she was very adamant about not recording it. But the other, there were other sessions that were recorded. So if we can get access to those, that'll be awesome.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So as we end, we just want to remind you that our next meeting is in September, but just note, just for September's meeting, the time is going to change from the morning to the afternoon at 3 p.m. And we're doing that because if you are a member of CASFEP or you'd like to become a member of CASFEP, they are hosting their California Collaborates webinar series. And so that will be every Thursday throughout September. September in the morning. So again, we wanted to allow those of you that are attending that to be able to come to our meeting at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So with that,
Adrian,
yes.
I'm going to interrupt you again just to let
Yes.
people know, and we'll be sending out a flyer soon, but we have invited the CDE Fiscal Monitoring Office to join us, and that will be in September. And they'll be doing a session just on fiscal issues related to federal programs. So we will get you a flyer on that. I'm digging right now for the date, but I believe it is September, I think it's like 13th. So we will send you that, so be looking for that.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll quit interrupting you now, Adrienne.
No, it's all good. So we do invite you to please place any questions in our chat, or if there's issues that or you would like us to address at our next month's meeting, we definitely want to provide you with that additional information. So again, we want to thank you for joining us today. We pretty much almost went to the full time, but again, we just you have the chat here. We also will post and our questions, our Q&A to any of the questions that have been placed here in the chat. And so with that, I wanted to give you our contact information, as well as the links to our state and federal programs and our LCAP. Okay, thank you so much.